My husband did not kiss me at our wedding. He did not get shy or flustered. He just looked at me with those cold gray eyes when the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," then gave me his arm instead and walked us back up the aisle like we had just signed a contract, while people clapped like they had watched the perfect love story. I did not know the full truth then, but I could feel something was wrong, and I was right. Landon Hayes, billionaire CEO, had not married me because he loved me or even liked me. He married me because my last name was Caldwell, and he wanted to hurt my father. My name is Alina Caldwell, and this is how I went from being part of his revenge to the one person he never planned on needing. The day looked perfect from the outside. White roses, gold trim, polished floors, soft music, guests whispering, power couple, and I smiled and told myself that maybe we could build something real over time, because that is what you do when the decision is already made and your parents are beaming. Walking down the aisle on my dad's arm, I tried to read Landon's face: black tux, jaw tight, eyes flat, no nerves, no joy, just the look of a man who had finally checkmated someone, and a little voice in my head said, "Run." But my dress was heavy and my family was watching, so I kept walking. On the drive to the reception, with the city sliding past the tinted windows, I finally said, half joking, "You know you skipped the kiss," and without looking away, he answered, "I did what needed to be done, so I asked." Needed for who, your shareholders or your bride? And that was when he actually turned and said, calm as anything, "You and I both know this wedding was never about you and me. If you want to know what it is about, ask your father." I smiled through the rest of the night, posed for photos, listened to speeches about love, all with that line pounding in my chest. In the penthouse later, he loosened his tie, glanced at the bed covered in petals, and said, "You take it, I will sleep on the couch." And when I told him he did not have to pretend he did not feel anything, he said, "I am not pretending. I do not," then walked out with a pillow under his arm. The next morning I still tried, because that is just who I am. I made coffee, set out breakfast, said good morning, and he nodded, ignored the food, and told me he did not eat carbs. So I said I did not realize he was allergic to basic manners too, and for a second he almost smiled before he shut it down and said, "We were not that kind of couple that if I wanted a home I should build one myself, just not expect him to live in it." So while he buried himself in Orion Holdings and moved into a guest room like the marriage bed never existed, I took an empty room upstairs, turned it into an art studio, and slowly started filling that cold house with paint music and the sound of people actually laughing again. The more the staff realized I was not made of glass, the more that house started to feel alive. And I clung to that, because if I could not have a husband, I at least wanted a home. One night in the kitchen, I put on Landon's spare glasses, grabbed a mop handle, and did this over-the-top impression of him saying, "I am Landon Hayes. We do not have time for emotions or breakfast," and everyone was laughing. Until the room suddenly went quiet, and I saw him in the doorway. He walked in, glanced at the video on a phone, then at me, still in his glasses, and said, "Glad to see morale is high." I told him we needed warmth in the house, and he said, "I did not realize I married a clown." It hurt, but I smiled and said, "Better a clown than a corpse," and his mouth twitched before he turned and left. That could have been just an awkward moment, but a few weeks later he went after the one thing that was really mine. I had been working for months on my first solo gallery show when my curator called in tears to say the venue had canceled because the sponsor had pulled out. The sponsor was a shell company tied to Hayes Holdings. I confronted him, asked if he did it, and he did not bother to deny it. Called it reallocating resources, said it was not personal. I told him using his power to crush my show felt pretty personal, and that was when he finally said he had never promised me a partnership, that he married me to wipe my father's smile off this city, and if he had to take me down too, he would. My eyes burned, but I refused to cry. I just said, "You may have married me for war, but I did not come here to surrender," and I walked out, and for the first time he did not look like he had won. After that, nothing changed, and everything changed at the same time. He still stayed late, still slept in the guest room, but he started noticing me in ways he could not pretend away, like the afternoon he stopped outside my studio and saw me barefoot, paint on my leggings, dancing with my brush in front of a half-finished canvas, because I thought I was alone. I felt him in the doorway, and without turning, I said, "Are you going to lurk there or admit you are impressed?" He called me ridiculous. I called him Batman, and for a second, we were just two people trading banter instead of enemies in the same house. Then came the charity gala for childhood literacy, one of the few causes he actually cared about, because of his dad. He told me I was expected to be there, and when I came down the stairs in a navy gown, I almost talked myself out of wearing. He stared a beat too long, caught himself, and muttered that I cleaned up well, and I teased him that he almost sounded impressed. At the gala, he worked the room like he always did. I did my thing, talking to everyone, making them laugh, and more than one person asked him where he had been hiding his wife. At one point, I was joking with one of his board members, Jackson, who rested a hand lightly on my arm, and across the room, I watched Landon's jaw clench, his eyes sharpen. And yeah, that happened, Mr. This is just a transaction. Did not like anyone touching the wife he did not want. In the car on the way home, he was quiet, so I said, laughing, "You stared at Jackson like he totaled your favorite car," he said. Jackson was a snake. I called him dramatic. And for the first time, we laughed together, like really laughed. And for a few minutes, I forgot we were supposed to be on opposite sides. But the real twist did not happen in a ballroom. It happened in the middle of a storm. Landon was supposed to fly out for a 3-day retreat, but a brutal storm grounded his plane, so we drove up to his cliffside villa to wait it out, this stark stone and glass place hanging over the ocean that felt exactly like his personality. By evening, the wind was howling, rain hammered the windows, the power went out, and suddenly it was just the two of us on a rug in front of the fireplace, no Wi-Fi, no staff, nowhere to hide. I joked that the universe had finally yanked his spreadsheets out of his hands and locked him in a room with his wife. He rolled his eyes. But as we sat there watching the flames, something in his shoulders dropped. I told him I knew he hated my father, that I did not know the details, but I could feel the wound every time he looked at me. And maybe it was the dark, maybe the storm, maybe he was just tired, but for the first time he told me the truth. He talked about his dad, Daniel, bringing Richard in as a friend, trusting him the board, turning when things went bad, my father staying quiet while Daniel was pushed out the stroke a year later. The years spent watching someone else's name on the company he built, and how that broke something in him that never healed. Hearing it from his mouth, it did not sound like restructuring the way my family had framed it. It sounded like betrayal. I told him I was sorry, not in that cheap way people use when they want to end a hard conversation, but in the way you say it when you finally see the other half of the picture. And I told him, "You got broken by what my father did, and I got broken by what you did with that pain, and both of us are bleeding for decisions we did not make." He looked at me and asked why I was still kind to him after everything, and I said, "Because if I let your bitterness turn me cruel, you win twice, and for the first time the silence between us did not feel like a wall. It felt like a bridge. We moved closer without planning to, and when he finally kissed me, it felt like anger and grief and something softer all crashing together, and we let ourselves have that one night there on the rug, with the storm raging outside. No revenge, no strategy, just two hurt people finally dropping their armor and reaching for each other. I fell asleep with my head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, thinking, remember this? This is the real man under all that steel. Morning has a way of tearing away whatever courage the night gives you. When I woke up, the storm had quieted. Light was creeping across the floor. His arm was still around me, and for a second, I thought we had turned a corner. Then I felt him go rigid, his body tense, his eyes open and fixed on the ceiling. I whispered, "Good morning," and without looking at me, he said, "Do not make this into something it is not." I sat up, pulled the blanket around myself, and told him he could not pretend that night had not been real. And he said, "I have to pretend that is the only way this works. I cannot let myself feel anything for you, Alina, because that would mean forgiving your father, and I am not there." My chest actually hurt, and I told him, "So you would rather burn down something real than let go of a grudge that is killing you?" He threw back that I did not know what it was like to watch a parent die powerless, I said. "And you think punishing me fixes that?" And there was nothing he could say that would make that make sense. The flight home was silent. Me with music blasting in my ears, staring out the window, him pretending to work. And that night, he went into his father's old study, the one nobody touched, and stayed there until his eyes were red, and his face finally looked like grief, not rage. A few days later, he went to see my father, and I was not in that room. But I know my dad finally admitted what he had done, said he had been weak, that Daniel deserved better, and hearing that out loud shook something loose in Landon. That same night, he came to my studio, stood in the doorway, and said, "I am sorry for using you as a weapon, for unloading all my pain on you, for becoming a man my father would not respect." And I told him, "I hear you, but I need to see you," then turned back to my canvas and left the door open. After that, his apology turned into small, steady changes. He started coming home earlier, sitting quietly in the corner while I painted, asking about my work, and really listening. He covered me with a blanket when I fell asleep on the library couch. Instead of walking past, he stopped using silence as a weapon and started using it to listen. One afternoon, he left a wooden box on the counter with a simple, "For you" inside was a set of vintage oil paints from Italy I had mentioned once in passing, and I just walked up and hugged him, no speeches, and he hugged me back like he needed it as much as I did. Later, I found a black envelope on my easel with legal papers creating an art foundation called the Free Spirit Collective, funded by Hayes Holdings. But under my full creative control, focused on giving young artists from tough backgrounds the chances I had my name alone at the top and at the bottom next to his signature. He had written 4 words, "I believe in you," and those 4 words did more to heal me than any grand gesture ever could. The night I truly forgave him was on the rooftop of the first building his father had ever owned, the one he used to talk about demolishing, to erase the past. Instead, he had restored it, and there was an easel set up facing the sunset, a blank canvas waiting. He handed me a brush and said I wanted to bury my past here, but now I want to start something new with you. If you will let me, I know I hurt you, and I will spend the rest of my life proving I will not do it again. I am not asking you to erase what I did. I am asking to build something better on top of it. I stood there, with all of our history sitting between us. Then I dipped the brush in gold and made the first stroke across the canvas. He picked up his brush and added deep blue, and together we painted a sky clearing after a storm, and somewhere in the middle of that painting, my hand found his and did not let go. That night, we went home and got into bed, not as strangers bound by revenge, not as enemies, but as 2 people who had walked through fire and chosen to stay. No big declarations, just his hand resting on my hip, my head against his chest, our breathing finally in rhythm. And for the first time since that cold wedding day, I felt like our marriage was real. It is not perfect. Now we still have scars and triggers and days where the past taps us on the shoulder. But the difference is we face it side by side instead of throwing it at each other. So here is what I really want to know. If someone marries you for the wrong reason, uses you as part of their revenge, but then genuinely faces their own darkness and does the work to change, is it strength to stay and build something new with them? Or is it foolish? Would you have left after that storm at the villa? Or would you have stayed the way I did and given him one more chance, do you think? Revenge ever really feels like justice, or does it just spread the hurt to people who did not earn it? Tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place, how you feel about second chances and grudges and the cost of holding on to anger. And if my story hit a nerve or reminded you of something you have lived or seen, feel free to share it. And if you want more stories like this, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, send this to someone who needs to hear it, and let us argue it out down there, because I honestly want to know whose side you are on after hearing all of this.